also happened in Jakarta, I think last Friday or early Saturday. There was a tidal wave that came into the Pluit district, which is in North Jakarta. They were very close to the sea, but the sea levels just rose, and it went in a tidal wave to, you know, to a lot of, even covered the front of a mall, if I'm not mistaken.
It's quite ironic because the one that is inundated is the less privileged area, while the privileged area was free from the water, actually.
And that is exactly why climate injustices happen, because this is what we have to advocate for, because indeed climate change is no longer a distant threat, as you've seen in previous stories. It's here, and it's affecting every aspect of life, from rising temperatures to unpredictable weather patterns, from shrinking glaciers to the loss of biodiversity or typhoon seasons completely changing. And these changes are happening now. But here's the good news. We have the power to change course, and that power lies in the hands of the next generation.
That's right, and how to understand climate change more simply and how important is youth engagement in climate action. To delve into the topic, we now have with us the Habibie Center Executive Board Secretary, Nadia Habibie. Nadia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, to put everyone into context, Nadia is the granddaughter of President Habibie, the third president of Indonesia. So, thank you for being with us today. And you've been an advocate for climate change in Indonesia through Habibie Center, I believe. Right, so you are collaborating with the Society of Renewable Energy to launch the first version of the book Climate Action 101, Indonesia's Guide for Newbies. As a person, you know, as a dumb person for climate change issues like me, so this is a book for me, right?
All right, let's take it.
What this book is all about, and you know, what can we gain from this book?
So this is a book for everyone. First of all, actually, thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be with you too. So as mentioned, you know, I am Nadia, the Executive Board of Secretary in the Habibie Center, an independent think tank that focuses on strengthening democracy. And in this case, it's democracy and sustainability. How do we ensure essentially a crisis as existential as sustainability, there is a civil society that can help represent the interests of citizens, including the vulnerable and the voiceless, like you mentioned, actually the vulnerable and the voiceless in Pluit. We do see in a gap in the market where, you know, the youth are bearing the impacts of climate change, the worst impacts of climate change, but we are not so much in the conversation. I think we could be more part of the conversation. Part of the reason why we believe is because it's been pretty technical, you know, the climate action discussions, right? And so we try really hard to break it down, these very technical concepts, into sizable and more digestible words as well as theories, and we couple it with illustrations. So that's why we're actually launching this. And as you mentioned, it is the first version of the book because it's in English, but fear not, the next year, the first half of the next year will be in Indonesian. We'll also actually have a social media play website video as well.
So it's not only targeted for Indonesians, but mostly for the youth around the world, right?
So, I mean, everybody is welcome to read it, but we are targeting more Indonesians and the youth. Why we are such a large group here, about 65 million in Indonesia, and you know, it's about time that we step up and make climate action, right? And climate action is actually less daunting than one can think. You know, first of all, we are going to be empowered with some of the purchasing decisions that we have to make. What are our next cars, our next homes, right? Motorcycles, take a public or private transportation. Buy energy efficient appliances. That is in our hands. And we can also actually, now that we're also going into the workforce, we also actually have the voice to be able to advocate how our companies can actually contribute to the larger sustainability goals. And last but not least, you know, if there are structural problems, right, in certain industries, example, nature, right, most solutions probably are better tackled at the government level. Not saying that individuals don't make a difference, but it is definitely more structural. Then, you know, this book helps kind of pose critical thinking questions that help guide the readers. You know, what are policies that are needed in Indonesia? How are other countries doing it? What can we actually learn from other countries? What can we not learn from other countries? So, you know, I think it sort of guides the reader to make somewhat benchmarking policies so that we can kind of navigate and advocate policies better here in Indonesia.
Right.
So I realize that the context is very Indonesian-like. You've prepared this book basically for anyone who is Indonesian, who want to know more in a language friendlier or less technical way. But this is full of research. Can I just know how long and how big the team was for you to put together all this information? Because I think what's interesting about this is you have to see all the diagrams that they have. This is all like data driven.
It's easily digestible, right?
Yeah, it's easily digestible because it's not just text.
Yeah.
I think the danger is if you read a book, you're always afraid that it's all text, right?
Yes.
So how long did it take you to put together this book particularly? Because I know that there is a certain language that needs to be spoken in order to reach the audience that you want.
Right.
And this is for the next generation, young people to make their daily lives decision, right?
Yes. Thank you so much for asking. So believe it or not, we actually made this in about 2 to 3 months. And the reason why is because we did see a momentum, and that was Indonesia Sustainability Forum that was done in September, and we wanted to launch it there. We wanted to launch it there so that we can sort of grab that momentum, right?
Yeah.
It was a huge team, so if you actually flick through the beginning, there's all sorts of youth involved, right? We have people from Society Renewable Energy, ITB, right? Illustrators, even people from McKinsey were actually involved. So we thank them very much. And the process is we actually ask, some of the experts to write their chapters. Afterwards, it gets edited to a bunch of newbies like myself, so that we can ensure it gets the language or the message gets gets across, right, to the reader. And then afterwards, we included some of the illustrations.
Cool.
So 2-3 months. Kind of I would say like a Chandi project. But I think it was great because we were all aligned on the same vision.
You had video animators.
Yeah, so there's actually a video included as well. Unfortunately, we can't play it now.
Digital version.
Digital, kind of like a sneak peek of the book.
Right.
Yeah.
It was done by actually ITB University kids.
Right.
SRE is very actually well connected in some of the universities, and they knew who won basically in annual competitions of videos. So they picked those kids to be able to create videos for us.
So this is for young people, made by young people for young people.
Made by young people.
I like that.
For young people. But what I'm really concerned about climate change issue is that it seems that these issues are for the privileged few. You know what I mean? Although it's for young generation, but the privileged few. And we have to admit that the literacy rate in Indonesia is pretty low. In terms of the reading habit in Indonesia is pretty low. How do you mainstream the valuable insights here so that it will be digestible by, we can say less educated people, we can say middle to lower income people, right? So they can learn or get the maximum benefit of this book and apply it in their daily life.
Right, that's a great question. I think at first we want to ensure that we have a knowledge repository. And why is this knowledge repository or this reference book is different from others is because we try our best to present a more balanced view, right? I think there's been a lot of movement that say, okay, let's all go green, but
what's green?
What's green?
What's green?
And what can we really do?
Yes,
adapt,
exactly.
right?
And why?
And there are repercussions actually to being just all green, right? I mean, Indonesia is a developing country with ambitious goals, Indonesia Emas 2045, right? Or Golden Indonesia 2045. So there needs to be a balancing act between the two. So I think that's one, but I think you have a very good point in that I think a lot of our readers tend to not like to read, or our target audience tend to not like to read. So I think first we would like to create that reference book, but then in the future we would also like to collaborate with players that can actually synthesize these information and make them, put them into different kinds of media. Social media, board games, right, website, videos and whatnot. But at first we want to make sure that we have that reference and that knowledge.
So you're looking at expanding this content into more digestible content, more social media-like content, right?
More sizable and digestible.
I find it really interesting because it doesn't matter as like you have this content first, because it doesn't matter which social social standing you come from or social background you come from, as long as the information is there and it's accessible to whoever.
Right.
I think it also goes to say that if you have an information that's digestible and accessible to everyone, it means that everyone will have the opportunity to actually learn from it as well. Because I think the problem right now is, Rory was right, everything seems to be so difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So, so separated from who actually would benefit from the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So that the thing, the references that are necessary could actually help. So, speaking of, I mean, we're already talking about, your audiences and things like that. How do you think we can effectively what is the state of the current climate change in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia? Now that you have the reference, what's the data looking like?
Not great, to be honest. We're at a critical state. I think you mentioned, first of all, there are high tidal waves, right, and fluid. I also just recently read, that our dengue rates are actually skyrocketing this year compared to last year. I think by 2 or 3 folds, right? And interestingly, it's because global warming actually contributed to the faster life cycle of dengue mosquitoes. So because the earth is getting warmer, mosquitoes are rapidly becoming adults and they attack people, right?
And Indonesia in particular, because Australia has issued a travel warning to Indonesia, as dozens of Australians, if I'm not mistaken, the number of the people get infected of dengue fever after visiting Bali in particular.
Oh, right. Yes. And actually, I've seen this also in my community where like entire families, including their household assistants, get dengue fever. So we are seeing global warming, not only, of course, in terms of temperature rises, but also heavy rainfall, but as well as just viral infections, which is very interesting. But
and
also scary.
But there's a lot. She's right, because there's a lot of vulnerability groups when it comes to illnesses, and it's not just infectious diseases, but people who have comorbidities, who can't stand the heat, are also really being affected by it.
But it's really interesting about your question that we're gonna dig deeper in the next segment, though, about who's actually responsible for global warming. Because if we pinpoint our finger, right, to big corporations, they do some changes, but if at the end of the day they still cut trees, they still turn forests into palm plantation. But at the same time, the middle, lower income, or even the educated ones, they haven't really applied the pro-environment activities, right? So who to blame, and what is the real solution for climate change? Answer that after the break. I believe it, requires long explanation, but we'll be back, so stay tuned with us.